Hello and welcome to Digging Deep with Deep Eddy, the podcast where we explore the mysteries of the mind and the benefits of therapy. I'm your host, Dr. Shumway, and I'm here to guide you through some fascinating topics related to psychology, mental health, and personal growth. Whether you're curious about how the brain works, how to cope with stress, improve your relationships, or find your purpose, this podcast might be for you. In each episode, we'll dive into a different aspect of the human psyche and learn from the experts in the field of psychotherapy. You'll get to hear from some of the best clinicians, researchers, and thought leaders in the state of Texas and across the country, many of whom, like myself, call Deep Eddy Psychotherapy home. We're so grateful that you've chosen to take time from your busy day to embark on this journey of discovery, growth, and sharing psychology with the world. And now, it's time to dig deep. To love oneself is the beginning of a lifelong romance. That quote was written by none other than Oscar Wilde, the renowned Irish poet, playwright, and novelist. He wrote that in 1894 as part of his collection of aphorisms titled Phrases and Philosophies for the Use of the Young. This was a year before he was imprisoned for loving another man, which at the time was illegal. This really reflects Wilde's belief in the importance of self-love and self-expression, even in the face of social condemnation. This quote appears in one of Oscar Wilde's plays where one of the characters says this as an indication that they're finally happy with themselves and ready to share their love with someone else. But self-love is controversial. Some people think it's a myth. It's something that people talk about but doesn't actually exist. It's not realistic. Some people see it as fluff. It's just content for your next Instagram post. And some people see self-love as the path to deeper connection with others. Today, we're going to dig deep on self-love, and we're going to do that with a very special guest on our first ever episode of Digging Deep with Deep Eddy, and that's Dr. Tori Olds. Dr. Tori Olds is a licensed psychologist and co-founder of Deep Eddy Psychotherapy. Tori has taught hundreds of therapists and psychologists about the latest therapy techniques and modalities for helping clients dive deeper into their emotional world. Tori has produced dozens of courses about the science of psychology and human nature, many of which are available on her YouTube channel. We're so thrilled to have you with us, Tori. Thank you so much for making the time.
It's wonderful to be here. Thanks, Skylar.
Really excited to dig deep on some big questions around self-love and self-compassion. And I think it would help to kick things off for our listeners just with some definitions and what comes up for you when you hear self-love.
Actually, self-love is not talked about quite as much in our field as self-compassion is. Certainly self-esteem, that was sort of our field's first try at it. And then we started talking about self-compassion. So I wonder if I could start a little bit by describing self-compassion and then talk about why self-love is a little bit different. And they're both beautiful and they're both needed, but they just hit slightly different needs. So self-compassion, there's been just tons and tons of research about through Kristen Neff, and our listeners might be aware of that research, but there's basically three components to it. The one is mindfulness. The first step is mindfulness. That just means if you're going to be compassionate to yourself, and compassion is defined as wanting to end suffering, whether it's somebody else's suffering or your own suffering, you just care. It's a lot like empathy, it's just, but it's wanting to end someone's suffering, caring about them. So the first step is just being mindful of them or mindful of yourself, because you can't, and you'll see how this builds to self-love in a moment, so I'll get there, but you can't really care about someone's suffering if you're not even noticing their suffering, if you're ignoring yourself, if you're ignoring someone else, how are you going to be stimulated to feel that authentic, natural, almost unavoidable emotion of compassion? So we're going to talk about that a little bit later when it comes to like how we get blocked from giving ourselves compassion, But that's the first piece, is just learning to slow down and to attend to ourselves.
So why do you feel like so many people struggle with this, Tori? I mean, this isn't something that comes naturally for everybody, right?
A lot of us have a lot of history of neglect in one way or the other. Maybe our physical needs were cared for. That's kind of easy. It's not easy. I know parents work really hard to put food on the table, but it's easier mentally to figure out like what kids need physically, like, okay, I've checked, like even our culture supports that. Like, have you checked all the boxes? Are they dressed and going to school? And, But we have other needs beyond that. And most of us have, uh, some level of neglect around feeling really seen for who we are, supported emotionally, valued, space to be creative, space to be our true self, especially when it comes to diversity and sexuality and all those pieces. So most of us have some place inside where some society at large or our parents or our community said, we're going to turn away from you and kind of ignore who you really are and what you're really going through. So that's why it's such a big practice, just as step one, to pay attention to ourselves. And by the way, I think that's why so many of us are practicing mindfulness nowadays, and why it's needed as a practice is because we've been conditioned to ignore ourselves.
Yeah.
We've been conditioned, we've been taught to be non-mindful to survive. So that was adaptation most of us had to make, was, okay, to survive best, I'm going to be not mindful of what I feel, of what I truly want, of what I need, of what's going on in the family, because you're not supposed to voice it. Like, that's how I'm going to survive. Like, we were taught, like, our early training was like anti-mindfulness training. You know what I mean? It's like, that was the practice we did,
Yeah.
And so now all of us are like, crap, like, we have to learn how to be mindful. But I think it's actually the more natural state. It's just we were trained out of it.
How does somebody train into it? Is it sit on the floor cross-legged and breathe deeply and imagine yourself on a Zen cloud? Like, what's the best way to practice mindfulness?
I mean, I think sometimes people come in with a striving for a particular state, but it's a little bit of a paradox, because mindfulness is like, no, literally anything goes. Like, anything's accepted. You're going to accept anything. That's the point, kind of. So people feel like they need to do it right. Like, I have to be calm. I have to actually calm down my thoughts. I have to be in a certain Zen, peaceful looking state and blah, blah, which, by the way, I think is also a little bit unfair when we look at different cultures and neurodivergence and all these things. It's like we've gotten a little bit marketed. The way mindfulness has been marketed has cheapened it a little bit, or like made it very white, very privileged, on a fancy beach, all thin, doing a really hard yoga pose and looking blissed out, as if happiness is the goal. I mean, there's a lot of ways that mindfulness gets marketed weird. So that's one thing. But if we actually take, like, okay, you don't have to look or be or feel like that woman on the beach that is very clearly blissed out and, whatever. It really is about just saying, I see you, self, and you're okay with me. Like, I can just for a moment notice you without having to change you. And actually, I'm not having to change you, even if it's fidgeting. Okay, fidget. Like, just be fidgeting. Like, just for a moment, let yourself not be managed critically by yourself. And that's really all that mindfulness is at its core. And I think that maybe needs a little bit different messaging, especially for people who have difficulty. They think they need to be calm. Or just kind of for a moment, just like, I really think more of it like saying I'm here, like just like you would a friend, like more relationally, rather than like I'm entering a certain state, even focused state or whatever. It's just like when you sit down to with a friend who's struggling, and turn to them and say, hey, I'm here. And you just reach a little hand out. And it could even be a 5-second little gesture or something, it doesn't have to be like 10 minutes, but if you just say, I'm here, I'm listening. Is there anything you want to tell me? I know that's I'm making it maybe sound easier than it is, but I think that would be one step. The only other step I would say is like just noticing, then you're turning to the anxiety and say, oh, I'm pretty anxious about this, self. And no trying to manage it, because the whole point is you're not managing anything. So you just say like, oh man, this is really anxiety producing. I'm just not going to judge. I'm going to see if I could just not judge myself for that, and be like, oh, okay, that's my experience. There's, of course, deeper levels you could get into if you get really curious, because curiosity is huge, and say, is there anything myself wants to tell me about why this is scary and feels ready to share? And if not, that's fine. But is there anything, maybe I can journal, or maybe I can move it, or maybe there's an image or some way to, like, anything my system could express to me of why this feels hard to do, why it feels hard to slow down. And then at least you're not forcing a slowdown. You're just saying, okay, just, can I understand maybe why, talk a little bit to the parts that are having trouble slowing down.
So step one is all about slowing down, tuning into oneself, and paying attention. What comes next?
We have this weird little glitch in our brain where the moment we make a mistake, we're vulnerable, we're anxious, we're just struggling, there's a way in which our system like demotes us from the right to human contact. It's like it's just like this weird illusion where we feel like we're the only one. And it makes us weird, it makes us less, and everyone else has it together. And like, we need to kind of bury our head in the sand and like, don't want contact, right? It's like, and we know, but if we slow down, I think we all, and at least intellectually, know like, wait a second, to struggle and make mistakes and feel uncertain and to feel insecure and like to feel pain and not know what to do, like that literally is the one thing we all share. Probably the only thing. I mean, there's some good things too, but like cross-culturally, like I don't care if you're like president or you're like, every single person struggles like that and has pain. So that's like what we share. So just reminding ourselves of that begins to like help our system go away from that, like, I'm going to just curl into a ball and die, like be a little isolate, basically, like even isolate from myself and say like, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one. This is not weird that I need compassion right now. So those are the two, like slowing down to see our pain, realizing it's not weird we have pain, and then giving care. We could see an absolute stranger on the street, and if they've fallen down and we know what it's like to fall down, or they're in sudden pain, or it's like we could go up to them and absolutely give 100% of our compassion to them, and there'd be no block to that. But it would be less fitting to look in their eyes and say, I love you. So there's a slight difference. I mean, there may be, I know there's like many versions of love. So it depends how you're defining the word love. But so there may be some love you could feel, like love for your fellow man, kind of a fellow man or woman kind of thing. But it's not the intimate, I'm bonded to you, I connect, like I know I love you. Like you wouldn't have that for a stranger, where you could have compassion for anybody. Compassion is very unearned. You don't have to, hopefully no one should have to earn compassion. So when we're working with ourselves, sometimes starting with compassion is a place we can start if love feels too intimate, like too, I don't know, like, I don't know if I love myself, but I can at least acknowledge that I'm like all other humans. Look, I didn't choose to be here. I didn't even sign up for this, and I definitely didn't like choose evolution and the brain I got and the family I got and the body I got and like, the experiences I had when I was like, at the very least, like if I'm going to judge myself, like I should have at least had to like sign something ahead of time, like knowing what I was getting into to come into this life, then maybe self-judgment could come in. Probably not even then, but none of us did that. We just kind of are here struggling. And so I think that's a little easier to say, okay, I can at least give myself some compassion there. But the more we're able to really slow down and notice ourselves and see ourselves accurately, and the more that compassion softens us and opens us and makes us actually feel safe, because compassion is actually very regulating in the brain, actually, so that we can touch our pain without it feeling overwhelming. There's still two little side parts of our brain. I guess you can't see in the podcast, but they're like little crescents on the side of our head toward the front, but on each side. And one is, from compassion from others, and the other side is compassion from ourselves. And boy, when we send that down to our lower brain, it's very, very regulating. So compassion really not only opens the moment we see our pain, but then also can really regulate the pain so we can stay with it long enough to fully get it. To fully get what we went through without having to minimize it or turn away from it or be overwhelmed by it and re-traumatized by it. Like just in a grounded, resourced way where we have something to give, we can actually just get it and really listen to our previous self that struggled and be like, oh my God, that really wasn't okay. That was really hard in a way I wasn't able to look at until now. And the more we have those kinds of experiences, I think we really do learn to appreciate ourselves, and to see our beauty. Like if you look at it, like we can go back, I do lots of inner child work. If we can go back to our self and just through memory, just imagining what was I doing when I was 5? Like, what was that like? And we visualize it, there's a way we are often able to finally see ourselves accurately. Like, wow, I took that moment when I was 5 and I took on this narrative that I'm less than everybody. Like, but now my adult self, I'm going to go back with my adult self and my compassion online. Whew, like, suddenly I'm completely seeing myself differently. I'm like finally seeing it for truth, like seeing who I am, what I experience. It's like, and when that happens, when we can see anyone, actually, if we can see anyone truly without illusions and narratives and blah, blah, blah. We probably would love just about anybody, you know what I mean? Like we're all trying. So like, but that's true when it comes to ourselves. Like if we can finally like actually look ourselves accurately, then it's hard not to just really get bonded to ourselves. Just like we would if we had a little kid that first we were adopting and they're kind of foreign to us, but like the more we show up for them, then like we really take them on as family, you know, and now we're committed to them and we understand them. It's not just like, yes, everyone deserves compassion, but we like specifically know their strengths and weaknesses and what's lovely about them. But we can accept the hard stuff because they're this whole package and we're showing up. And it's like that kind of bonding is so intimate. It's so sacred. Gosh, it's so precious. And is very possible to do that with ourselves over time so that we really actually do love ourselves.
In some families and some cultures, it can honestly be shameful to be so tuned into oneself and caring about oneself because we're taught that you should be taking care of other people. And I know that's the case for so many of us who work in the field of mental health, that you should be other focused. So I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are on people who maybe it's not about being unattuned or not mindful, but this is almost a conscious choice because of the way that you grew up.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think our culture sometimes idealizes, you know, just complete like self, you know, just driving ourselves into the ground. I mean, it's just not even, it's yes, selflessly, but also like just work in general, expecting ourselves to, you know, it's like it's just like we treat ourselves like a machine that we're trying to like extract from or something like that. I don't know, kind of how we treat the earth, you know, it's like, it's not natural, you know, to be so like, what can we extract from people? What can we extract from the earth? What can we extract from ourselves? It's not that relational. It's not that loving. And it's ultimately not that helpful for any of those ecosystems, including the ecosystem that is our mind. That's kind of what we already described about like when you are loving to yourself, it's like watering your own inner garden so that you have flowers to give. You know, it's like it's just all the flow. Like it allows everything. It doesn't have to be just one direction. It just allows your system to be like healthy and available. And that will be noticed by other people in a positive way. It's not about becoming selfish or self-involved or, again, we talked about narcissistic, none of that. And of course, you know, other things we could say about narcissism really ultimately being rooted in shame. It's a defense against not getting self-love, having self-love. If I don't have the deep well that is self-love, I can put on a mask, a very brittle illusion of grandiosity and not needing it and being perfect and convince myself that I feel that way when I don't. It's not really sourcing from anything deep. So the more we really deeply love ourselves, the less likely we are to get trapped by narcissism. It's like really, it makes us strong. Like it's not like, oh, coddling ourselves and we're gonna get soft. Like it doesn't take away it like makes us stronger, more resilient. If you imagine a parent saying like, I'm gonna try to be compassionate to my child, like even when they're struggling or acting out or having difficulty or, you know, having lots of feelings, I'm gonna try to hold a stance of compassion. Like we wouldn't tell that parent like, that sounds like taking the easy road. You know, that should be simple. We'd say, wow, good for you. That's a deep commitment. A good parent isn't just permissive and just, oh, I'm so sorry. It's also, no, you have to sit down and do your homework. I'm sorry. Or like, I'm going to, I'm going to challenge you in appropriate ways. I'm going to say, no, you can't eat all the ice cream that you want. And that also is love. So we're talking about good care. And it's not, yes, in moments we do need to be able to cry and like have like that, oh, and you know, all that stuff. But it's also looks like a coach on the other hand, you know, and that may be easier for men, especially. That's like, okay, good. I want to be a good coach to myself. Like if I were, you know, leading a sports team, like I want to get in there. I want to be on my side, challenge myself, but also like, be like, oh God, we can do it. Let's pick you back up. Let's try again. You're okay. I'm still here with you. I care about you. Like all of those pieces are really, it's like the full filling out the picture of what self-love can look like. Yeah.
And I think we can all agree that's a beautiful picture. And I can imagine some people are excited about starting some of this work. So how do you get started?
Sometimes this work isn't as easy as it seems. So there's kind of levels. The first level is just learning and trying to practice it. You could do that through checking out Kristen Neff's website. Certainly on my YouTube channel, so Tori Olds' YouTube channel, I go through how to use what's called parts work to do this. So you could look at my IFS. It's called IFS. I want internal family systems. It doesn't matter but if you just search IFS and Tori Olds, it'll kind of walk you through how to work with your inner critic, which is one of the biggest blocks. So how to like talk to that part, say, hey, be in relationship with your inner critic. Weirdly enough, that's the first place compassion is needed, is to our very inner critic. This is a place where I think people can really stumble, because if you hear like, you should really love yourself, it sounds like we're saying, let's make the inner critic the bad guy. Like we're trying to defeat the inner critic, get rid of the inner critic. But that's actually just a part of us that needs compassion too, because it needs to be understood about why it came onto the scene in the first place and what pain it was associated with and how it learned it needed to protect us. And it has real fears that are based on real experience. They may not be true. Like they may be fears that we're now ready to overcome, but they're not based on nothing. And so if we push past our self-critic and are just like, no, I'm going to love myself, we actually are, it actually causes our whole system to lock up. So the first place, weirdly enough, is to turn to our inner critic, or the part of us that is hard on us or goes to shame or thinks we're bad or whatever. And just see if we can find some compassion for that part, knowing that it's probably there trying desperately to protect us from something. We may not know what it is yet. And if we can do that, we can begin to become curious and say, oh, why are you so hard on me? What are you afraid would happen if you weren't? And we can begin to understand the story, our own story, but from the lens of that learning. And that is really work that most people need more care around than even just a typical, let's try to do a self-compassion practice, even though that's great. And one of the places you could go for that would be my YouTube. There's also lots of books and things around how to work with parts. But and then the only other thing to understand with that piece is, the first is just beginning to try. And then as these parts come up that resist, just really getting curious about why might it be scary. We really might have learnings, experiences in our history that say it is really dangerous to love yourself. And some of those deeper fears we found as we've worked with clients on this, people who do experiential work especially, is we might be surprised what the reason is. It's not just, I was told I was bad. Sometimes it's feeling that I'm bad is the one way to make mom and dad still seem okay in my mind. And I really need to love them because I need to be attached to them. Which is kind of surprising when we realize that. So there's all sorts of ways, as we go deeper with it, it's like, okay, really getting to the bottom of how did I learn this? Because it is learned to be hard on ourselves. It is learned if we hate ourselves, hard on ourselves, judge ourselves, all of that is learned. So then really beginning the journey of understanding, how did I learn that? And how am I going to unlearn that? And honestly, that level of work probably is going to be helpful to have some therapy for.
You've been listening to Digging Deep with Deep Eddy, the podcast produced by Deep Eddy Psychotherapy, one of the leading mental health providers in the state of Texas. If you're curious about going deep yourself and would like to give therapy a try, just visit us on our website at deepeddypsychotherapy.com. If you'd like to learn more from Dr. Tori Olds, you can find her YouTube channel by going on YouTube, searching Dr. Tori Olds, and you'll find plenty of videos and awesome content on all sorts of topics related to the science of psychology. If this episode resonated with you, please take a moment to share with others. Post it on your social media, pass it along to a friend or family member or coworker, somebody who could maybe use a little more self-love in their life. Until next time, take good care of you.